Africa's biggest problem isn't the people, it's the politicians. Africa holds 30% of the world's mineral resources, yet nearly half of its people live on less than $2 a day. How can a continent so rich leave its people so poor? Some say it's because Africans are lazy, corrupt by nature, or incapable of progress. But that's a lie. The truth is harsher and simpler. Africa's problem isn't its people, it's the politicians. For decades, Africa has carried a painful contradiction. On the one hand, it is a land overflowing with potential, fertile soil, abundant resources, brilliant youth, vibrant cultures. On the other hand, it is also a land where poverty, instability, and inequality dominate headlines. Why does this contradiction exist? Too often, the blame is unfairly placed on ordinary Africans themselves. People say, if only they worked harder, if only they were more disciplined, if only they cared about development. But when you look closer, the story is very different. Across the continent, Africans are working harder than ever. Farmers push through droughts. Young innovators create apps and startups despite limited resources. Millions of families hustle daily just to survive. The problem isn't a lack of effort, creativity, or intelligence. The real crisis is leadership. Politicians, those elected or self-appointed to serve, often become the very obstacle to the progress they promise. Instead of building nations, too many build personal empires. Instead of strengthening institutions, they weaken them so they can stay in power. Instead of serving the people, they exploit them. And that's why in this video, we'll dive deeper. We'll explore how history set the stage for these failures, how today's leaders continue the cycle, and how ordinary Africans pay the price. But we won't stop at the problems. We'll also look at the signs of hope, the movements pushing back, and the possibility of a future where leadership finally matches the strength of the people. Because the truth is clear, Africa doesn't lack talent or resources or spirit. What it lacks is politicians who put the people first. When African countries began gaining independence in the 1950s and 60s, there was a wave of optimism across the continent. People filled the streets, waving flags, singing freedom songs, and celebrating the end of colonial domination. The dream was simple but powerful. A new Africa, free to govern itself, free to shape its own destiny. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana and Julius Nyerere in Tanzania spoke of unity, prosperity, and dignity. It was a moment of immense possibility. But independence also came with heavy baggage. Colonial powers had spent decades, and in some places centuries, extracting wealth, dividing communities, and weakening traditional systems of governance. The borders they left behind weren't drawn with respect for history, culture, or ethnicity. They were drawn with rulers and maps in faraway European offices. Entire nations were stitched together from groups that had never been united before, while others were torn apart and scattered across artificial boundaries. Worse still, colonial governments had deliberately left behind weak institutions. Courts, parliaments, and checks on power were barely developed. Instead, colonial rulers had relied on force, divide-and-rule tactics, and loyalty to the empire. When independence arrived, these fragile systems couldn't hold up against the weight of real governance. The new leaders stepped into office with enormous expectations, but very little institutional support. And then came the Cold War. Suddenly, African nations found themselves pawns in a global chess game between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both sides poured in money, weapons, and political backing, not to help Africa grow, but to ensure loyalty. Dictators who promised allegiance to one side or the other were propped up and protected, even when they oppressed their own people. Leaders who resisted risked coups or assassination. This toxic mix, artificial borders, weak institutions, and outside interference, created the perfect storm. Many of the first generation of African leaders, once hailed as liberators, slowly slid into authoritarianism. Some clung to power by rewriting constitutions. Others built vast networks of patronage, rewarding allies while silencing critics. The dream of independence began to fade, replaced by the harsh reality of misrule. It's important to say this. The blame doesn't rest only with colonial history. While the legacy of empire left Africa with deep wounds, The choices made by African politicians after independence also shape the present. Instead of building nations, too many built cults of personality. Instead of investing in education and infrastructure, too many drained treasuries for private wealth. The seeds of today's crisis were planted decades ago, and they've been watered over and over by politicians who put power above people. If you look at Africa's greatest struggles, poverty, instability, unemployment, poor healthcare, crumbling infrastructure, there's a common thread running through them all: leadership failure. It's not that Africa lacks doctors, engineers, teachers, or entrepreneurs. It's that politicians at the top often make decisions that block progress rather than encourage it. Corruption isn't just about a few stolen dollars here and there. It's about billions siphoned off from national budgets while hospitals run out of medicine and schools fall apart. In Nigeria, billions from oil revenues have disappeared into private accounts. In Angola, during José Eduardo dos Santos's long rule, members of his family reportedly controlled massive portions of the nation's wealth, while ordinary Angolans lived in poverty. When money meant for roads, power plants, or hospitals ends up funding luxury mansions abroad, the nation pays twice, once through the lost opportunity and again through the suffering of ordinary people left behind. Many African politicians don't just want to serve a term in office, they want to rule for life. Constitutions get amended, term limits scrapped, and elections manipulated. Uganda's Yoweri Museveni has been in power since 1986. Cameroon's Paul Biya has ruled for more than 4 decades, often governing from abroad. These leaders treat countries like personal estates, holding on to power long after they've lost touch with the people. This obsession with power leads to political repression. Opposition leaders are jailed, journalists silenced, and critics exiled. Fear becomes a tool of governance, and the people lose their voice in shaping their own future. Even when leaders aren't overtly corrupt or dictatorial, many fail in the basic duty of governance. Roads remain unpaved, electricity unreliable, schools overcrowded, and hospitals underfunded. Instead of long-term investments, politicians chase quick wins that look good on campaign posters, but do little to build sustainable development. It's not unusual to see grand projects, gleaming airports, massive stadiums, or flashy skyscrapers built while rural villages lack clean water and children study under trees. The priorities are upside down, prestige over people. Across the continent, this pattern repeats. Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire drained billions while leaving his country impoverished. Sani Abacha in Nigeria looted billions from the treasury. Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe clung to power for decades, overseeing economic collapse. These aren't isolated stories, they reflect a common problem: leadership that puts personal gain above the nation. It's easy for outsiders, and sometimes even Africans themselves, to fall into the trap of blaming ordinary people for the continent's struggles. Words like lazy, unproductive, or incapable get thrown around as though Africa's future is doomed by its own citizens. But the evidence tells a very different story. Across the continent, people wake up every day and push forward despite staggering odds. Farmers cultivate crops on land battered by droughts and floods. Market women spend long hours selling goods just to put food on the table. Taxi drivers work from dawn to midnight navigating dangerous roads, often with little reward. Ordinary Africans have built solutions where politicians have failed. In Kenya, M-Pesa revolutionized mobile money, giving millions access to banking. In Nigeria, Nollywood became one of the largest film industries in the world. In Ethiopia, small-scale farmers are experimenting with irrigation and new techniques to adapt to climate change. The African diaspora also proves the point. Millions living abroad thrive in medicine, engineering, business, technology, and academia. Brain drain is not a sign of weakness. It is a symptom of failed governance. Everyday heroes exist in every community. Teachers showing up despite overcrowded classrooms, doctors saving lives with minimal resources, artists and musicians inspiring change. Africa's people are doing their part. The failure lies in leadership that refuses to match their energy and sacrifice. Leadership failure in Africa isn't abstract. It shows up in the daily struggles of millions, and the cost is measured in lives, lost opportunities, and shattered dreams. Despite Africa's immense wealth, millions live in extreme poverty. Nigeria, one of the largest oil producers, still suffers daily blackouts and millions lack clean water. Education and healthcare systems are often broken. Children learn under trees, hospitals run out of medicine, and maternal mortality remains high. Africa is the world's youngest continent, but with few jobs, millions of youth are left frustrated. Some migrate in dangerous conditions, others turn to crime or fall prey to extremist groups. Weak governance also fuels wars, coups, and insurgencies, as seen in South Sudan and the Sahel region. Talented Africans leave in search of opportunity, robbing nations of potential. Leaders and thinkers argued that political freedom without economic independence would be incomplete. Major movements and milestones. In the 20th century, Pan-Africanism became a powerful force for political change. The Pan-African Congresses, beginning in 1919, united leaders and intellectuals to advocate for African independence and racial equality. These congresses highlighted issues of colonial exploitation, racial discrimination, and the need for global solidarity among African peoples. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana became a central figure in translating Pan-African ideals into political reality. Nkrumah envisioned a united Africa, where nations collaborated politically and economically to overcome colonial legacies. His leadership helped Ghana become the first African nation to gain independence in 1957, inspiring movements across the continent. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania promoted African socialism, emphasizing community, education, and self-reliance. He believed that development must be rooted in African values and traditions rather than impose foreign systems. Patrice Lumumba of the Congo symbolized courage and sacrifice in the struggle for independence, advocating for the full liberation and unity of African peoples. From Algeria to Kenya, Senegal to Zimbabwe, independence movements gained momentum, guided by the ideals of Pan-Africanism. These movements connected local struggles to a shared continental vision of freedom, justice, and unity. Pan-Africanism also shaped international diplomacy. African nations began to work together in forums such as the Organization of African Unity, which later became the African Union, promoting peace, development, and collective security. Impact on the African diaspora. Pan-Africanism extended far beyond the continent. In the Caribbean, the Americas, and Europe, African descendants embraced the movement as a source of pride, identity, and empowerment. Communities connected through shared history, struggles, and culture, creating networks of solidarity that transcended borders. Cultural impact was profound. Jazz, reggae, hip-hop, and other forms of artistic expression carried messages of unity, resistance, and pride. Writers, poets, and scholars explored African identity, history, and diaspora experiences, challenging stereotypes and asserting dignity. Festivals, community organizations, and educational programs strengthened connections across continents. Through Pan-Africanism, the diaspora reclaimed their voice, influencing global culture, politics, and economics, while maintaining a deep connection to Africa. The movement emphasized that the African story was not limited to a continent, it was global. Modern relevance today, Pan-Africanism remains alive and evolving. The African Union embodies the dream of continental unity, promoting cooperation in economics, security, and governance. Young Africans and diaspora communities are using digital platforms to share ideas, organize activism, and promote African culture and entrepreneurship. Trade initiatives, technology projects, and educational programs demonstrate the practical impact of Pan-African ideals. Africa's cultural revival is thriving, with music, film, literature, fashion, and art celebrating heritage and identity. Festivals and Pan-African conferences connect people worldwide, reinforcing solidarity and shared purpose. The principles of Pan-Africanism continue to guide leaders and citizens: unity, pride, self-determination, and resilience. Across the continent and the diaspora, Pan-Africanism inspires new generations to work together, embrace culture, and challenge social, political, and economic inequalities. Pan-Africanism is more than a historical movement. It is a living vision of unity, pride, and shared destiny. Africa's strength lies in the resilience, creativity, and collaboration of its people. As Africa and its diaspora face the challenges of the 21st century, Pan-Africanism offers guidance, hope, and inspiration. It calls on individuals, communities, and nations to work together, celebrate heritage, and shape a future defined by dignity, justice, and opportunity. The dream of Pan-Africanism endures, rooted in history, alive today, and reaching toward a future where unity, freedom, and pride define Africa's story. For every story of corruption and misrule, there are stories of resistance and renewal. Africa is not standing still. Countries like Ghana, Botswana, and Senegal show that peaceful transfers of power and strong institutions are possible. Youth movements from Nigeria's End SARS protests to Sudan's revolution refuse to accept the status quo. Innovation thrives despite constraints. Nairobi's Silicon Savannah, fintech startups in Nigeria, and drone-based medical delivery in Rwanda are proof. Africa's music, film, and fashion are influencing the world, reshaping identity and culture. Even reform-minded leaders, though few, show that governance can be honest and visionary. Africa's story is not finished. Sparks of hope exist everywhere, waiting to grow into transformation. Africa's biggest problem isn't its people. It's the politicians who fail to serve them. Throughout history, bad leadership has stolen resources, crushed dreams, and trapped millions in poverty. But this is not hopeless. Ordinary Africans have always been resilient, creative, and determined. Africa has the talent, resources, and energy to thrive. What it needs is leadership that is honest, visionary, and committed to the people. Change starts with awareness, grows into action, and is written by every citizen demanding accountability. The next chapter of Africa's story is not written by politicians alone. It is written by all Africans who refuse to give up on their continent. Africa's greatest resource is its people, and when leadership finally aligns with them, there's nothing this continent cannot achieve.